A late spring afternoon in South Carolina, Robert Lesslie and his wife are enjoying time with their 2 grandchildren on their rural estate. 2 technicians work outside on a broken air conditioning unit, an ordinary day by any measure, but one that would end in the most horrific of ways, with the gunshot deaths of 6 people in a shooting rampage as inexplicable as it was horrific. Welcome to Fear Files, where we discuss and dissect the most mysterious, terrifying, and mind-bending cases from all over the world. Before we start, we would like to say that our thoughts and prayers go toward the families that fell victim to the deranged actions of this one particular man. Welcome to Rock Hill, a city located in South Carolina just across the border from Charlotte, North Carolina. April 7, 2021, 70-year-old Dr. Robert Lesslie was spending a relaxed day at home, enjoying some quality time with his wife, Barbara, 69, and their 2 grandkids, Ada Lesslie, age 9, and Noah Lesslie, who was just 5 years old. Robert Lesslie had practiced medicine in York County for decades, specializing in emergency room medicine. He was the well-respected medical director of the Piedmont Medical Center Emergency Room, where he worked for over 15 years. He also practiced at several other Charlotte area hospitals and was the medical director of Riverview House Calls and Riverview Hospice and Palliative Care. Robert was a pillar of the community, well-liked and admired by friends, colleagues, and all who knew him. Dr. Lesslie shared his home with his wife, Barbara, and a playful golden retriever named Moses. Also living on their sprawling rural estate were several miniature horses, goats, donkeys, chickens, and bees. Yes, the Lesslie homestead was a warm and welcoming haven for every member of the extended Lesslie family who frequented the house regularly. But on that spring day in April of 2021, it was not just their grandchildren at the house. Robert Shook and James Lewis, both 38 and both fathers of 3, were also at the Lesslies. James and Robert were air conditioning technicians there on a job. For them, this was a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. At 4:45 p.m. on Wednesday, April the 7th, a man in camouflaged pants and a dark hoodie mounted his four-wheeler, pulled out of the gravel driveway of his parents' home in Rock Hill, and drove a mile down Marshall Road, a quiet stretch of residential country asphalt. The man waved at a neighbor before taking a turn into the woods, where he followed long trails through the trees, eventually arriving at the ranch-style mansion in the middle of the country estate. There, in the yard, he pulled out 2 semi-automatic weapons. He approached the 2 men he encountered there, HVAC service contractors James Lewis and Robert Shook, and without uttering a word, opened fire. While Shook lay bleeding and calling for help, the man walked around the corner and shot Robert Lesslie and his wife Barbara, who were in their home gym, and the 2 young grandchildren in their care for that day, Ada and Noah, just 5 and 9 years old. By the time deputies arrived, less than 10 minutes later, the gunman had left. Everyone on the premises was dead except for Shook. Still, he had been shot 6 times. He was taken to the hospital where he received multiple surgeries before succumbing to his injuries 3 days later. The senseless shooting of the Lesslies, James Lewis, and Robert Shook devastated the town of Rock Hill and would become the subject of intense local and national media speculation for months to come. People grappled with what could possibly have driven someone to murder 6 innocent people, including 2 young children. And adding to the senselessness of it all was the identity of the gunman himself, their own star athlete and Rock Hill local, former NFL player, 32-year-old Phillip Adams. Adams was a retired NFL player who had played as cornerback and defensive back. He had played for many teams, including the San Francisco 49ers, the New England Patriots, the Seattle Seahawks, the Oakland Raiders, and the New York Jets, before retiring from the game in 2015 while playing for the Atlanta Falcons.
Leckler into punt, another high Lechler blast here. Phillip Adams, the 7th-round draft pick. Now, good return, 35-40. He may go. Lechler's the only guy that can stop him, and they block Lechler, and Adams will take it the whole way for a Niner touchdown. Phillip Adams, who was a surprise auditioner.
Adams reportedly suffered a horrific ankle injury during the second-to-last game of the 49ers' 2010 season. It was his first year as a professional. It should have ended his career, but he doggedly pushed his body to heal, and he returned to the game. He also suffered 2 concussions over the course of 3 games in the 2012 season with the Oakland Raiders. Adams had had some small run-ins with authorities over the years. In 2009, he was charged with simple assault and battery, but was acquitted of that charge in a bench trial. He was also convicted of several York County traffic violations, including driving under suspension and failure to maintain proof of insurance. But he had never committed a crime that would suggest he was capable of the heinous act he committed on April the 7th.
Against the Raiders in 2010. Is that
long time ago?
is that Coach Allen said that he's going to give you a shot there, or at least, is that you looking forward to that? Is that something you'd like to do?
Yeah, just looking forward to the opportunity. Happy I'm here. Just going to go out here and play hard, and I'm just glad I'm here.
Strange business, isn't it? One night you're returning kickoffs for the Seahawks against the Raiders, and then now you're here.
Yeah, it is. But you just keep on playing. You keep on learning and growing as a player.
Is this 4th team in 3 years? Are you getting used to this? Changing the addresses and this quick turnarounds.
I don't think it's nothing you get used to. I just think that you just keep on working. You just find a way to just keep on working, getting better as a player. And hopefully, the situation will be, a good one for you.
In the 6 years since his football career had ended, he remained close to home, taking it upon himself to care for his mother, Phyllis, a former high school teacher who had become paraplegic after a car accident a decade earlier. Phyllis, along with Adam's father, Alonzo, had done everything in her power to raise her son well. And for many years, it seemed that they had succeeded. Phillip had enjoyed a successful football career and was an accomplished athlete. He was well-liked outside of the field and a popular guy with a good heart who was fun-loving and enjoyed entertaining people. He never had a drop of alcohol and was very chill, according to his friends. Later, Joe Montgomery, who coached Adams in football at Rock Hill High School, the alma mater of numerous NFL players, said, quote, "He was the role model that all coaches hoped they could coach." Perhaps the first signs of looming trouble appeared shortly after Phillip's last-ditch attempt to make an NFL team failed. Phillip Adams had been so dedicated to football for his entire life. The sudden loss of the sport hit him hard. He had problems finding a job. He struggled with the pressure of having a child to support, and soon his behavior became erratic. Adams' agent said, "We encouraged him to explore all of his disability options, and he wouldn't do it. I knew he was hurting and missing football. I felt he was lost without football, somewhat depressed." Before the COVID pandemic struck, he opened a shop selling smoothies and juices, but it had gone bankrupt within a year of opening. And as time went on, there was a pronounced decline in his mental health. He became uncharacteristically aggressive, according to his sister. At times, he was quiet and withdrawn. He had always been laid back and relaxed. Now, he had a temper, and when enraged, it seemed like he was a totally different person. When he entered the Lesslie house, Adams had 2 weapons on him, a 9mm and a .45 caliber. When police arrived at the scene, they were told by a neighbor that the man who had committed the act was wearing a black hoodie and camouflaged pants.
The description we're given was a black male wearing black clothing, carrying something red, possible automatic gun.
Police advised people in the area to stay inside their homes. They had no idea who they were looking for, only that he was armed and clearly homicidal. By now, night had fallen. A state law enforcement division helicopter was deployed to search with their spotlight. Other police agencies, including the South Carolina Law Enforcement Department, or SLED for short, and others from local, state, and federal law enforcement departments were called in onto the scene. Canine units and patrol deputies were also brought in to assist detectives in the search. Locals were asked to not spread information on social media that hadn't come from official sources, out of respect for the families involved. The area they were conducting the search in was south of Rock Hill, west of Interstate 77, and north of the Chester County line. It is a place known for its heavily wooded landscape. Meanwhile, York County, across the state line in South Carolina from Charlotte, is home to around 275,000 people and could easily absorb and hide a culprit, but a tip soon arrived that would lead police directly to the perpetrator. Alonzo, Phillip Adams' father, had been driving his wife Phyllis that morning to visit a sister in Gastonia, an hour north of Rock Hill. Neither of them had any idea of the horrific events that unfolded in their absence. Theirs had begun just like any other day. On their way back that evening, they were unsettled by the sight of a significant police presence on Marshall Road, but at their home, everything seemed fine. Phillip was reading in his bedroom. He was calm and didn't show any indication of anything being wrong. Then, all at once, the peace was broken. It was around 9 p.m. when Alonzo heard voices of strangers in the yard. Then a vehicle pulled into the Adams driveway, and within seconds, law enforcement had surrounded the property. Alonzo went to the door and opened it, only to see chaos unfolding before his eyes. For a moment, he wondered if he was having a flashback to the time he served in an Army Special Ops unit. Men in combat gear had their guns trained on him and ordered the unsuspecting man to put his hands up and turn around. He did exactly as told. Still not knowing what had happened, Alonzo was handcuffed and seated on the grass in his front yard. The man begged police not to hurt his wife and son. Then he watched in shock as, using a loudspeaker, officers told Phillip to come out of the house with his hands up. Phillip refused. Officers repeated the order to no avail. And then the standoff continued for hours, with officers negotiating with the suspected killer, reasoning with him, then pleading with him to surrender. Not knowing if he was holding hostages in the house, they sent a robot in to scan. Just as Alonzo had said, there were only 2 people in the house, his wife Phyllis and his son Phillip. Police then tore into the house. It was around 2:30 a.m., and sometime between the moment they extracted Phyllis from the house, then they charged in to detain Phillip. The former NFL champion picked up a .45 caliber handgun and turned it on himself, his 7th and final victim. He was 32 years old. No one was present when Alonzo's son took his own life. When it happened, Alonzo was in handcuffs sitting in a cruiser a mile down the road. Confused, he asked questions that no one answered. He was desperately worried for the safety of his family. He sat alone for what seemed like an eternity before a detective appeared. The detective informed the handcuffed man that Phyllis, his wife, was safe. But then he broke the terrible news. His son, Phillip Adams, had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The police retrieved Phillip's body from the house. York County Sheriff Kevin Tolson later recalled how little sense it made to him. No matter which way he considered it, he could not make sense of why Phillip Adams would have done this. Throughout the days preceding the events of April the 7th, Phillip's young son, PJ, was on vacation in Miami with his mother, Ashley. When the news of what had happened reached her, Ashley decided to keep the terrible news to herself until they got back. She didn't want to ruin the little boy's holiday. Even after she told PJ of his father's death, Ashley kept part of the truth hidden. She took his iPad and disabled Google and didn't turn on the news. Phillip's murderous spree was headline news. For now, all that PJ needed to know was that his dad hurt himself and was no longer with them. And still, no one had any idea as to what made Phillip Adams kill 6 innocent people. His father later said that his son had plans to build a new house in the area and seemed relatively happy. He had bought 2 nice cars and was spending his days riding 4-wheelers through the fields and woods that surrounded them. He talked about wanting more children. And then there was his garden and the beginnings of a vision for a farm. These didn't seem like the actions and thoughts of a man planning double murder and then to kill himself.
Just tell me what you know, what you can say, sir.
Well, I can say that he's a good kid. He was a good kid, and I think the football messed him up. I don't think he ever did anybody any harm. So all I can tell you, we pray for the family that, and I used to be my doctor a long time ago, and I know they were good folks down there. I don't know what happened, and we're gonna keep them in our prayers.
Amen.
And y'all keep us in your prayers too.
Absolutely. Was he here? Is this where he?
Well, he just moved from Fort Mill.
No, I mean, was this where the police came last night?
Yeah.
And I heard that they got you guys out of the house.
They did.
And just, I know it's terrible what happened, but just like you said, you raised your son, and he was a good man. Just could you ever imagine? Was he in a lot of pain, do you think?
Well, he didn't talk much, and he didn't bother nobody. That's enough, okay? Okay.
In mid-April, Ashley took their son to the funeral home behind the new Mount Olivet AME Zion Church, where the family had gone for decades. Ashley had doubts about taking her young son there, but upon asking him directly, it seemed that he really wanted to see his dad. The mourning was for relatives only, and they tried to forget the presence of police who filled the area. The victims' families had issued a joint statement saying that their hearts held peace and forgiveness, but the internet was flooded with vicious comments from strangers. Eventually, PJ, their son, went to the casket where his daddy was, dressed in a suit and tie, and looking like he was sleeping. The boy spoke to him and then reached out and touched him. He put a coaster in the casket, something that he had made for his dad on Father's Day. The object had 4 words written on it: "I love you, Dad." Meanwhile, it seemed like the whole world was coming up with theories as to what would drive Phillip to do something so heinous. Was it his injuries and the constant gnawing pain that they caused him, the gruesome broken ankle, and Lord knows how many others? The loss of the game that he was so devoted to, and the bitter sting of rejection from all of those teams. Phillip had worked hard to be the best athlete he could be. He put constant pressure on himself, but he had been critical about his performance, striving for perfection every time and coming up short in his own mind. Adams won a state championship with the Rock Hill High School and was recognized as one of the area's best players. But life after football had been a brutal adjustment. Maybe it was the pressure of growing up in Rock Hill, otherwise known as Football City, USA, after all the NFL players it had produced. Maybe he struggled with the transition and creating a new identity. Then there was the devastation of his failed business venture. He hoped it would bring him new purpose, the smoothie shop, Fresh Life, which had lasted less than a year. Others said Adams had been inspired by a cult. On April 23rd, the sheriff announced that investigators had found cryptic writings in some of Adams' notebooks. Ashley, though, his ex-partner, dismissed this and said that he had always written in notebooks, and nobody close to Phillip remembers him talking about cults. One theory was that it was a personal vendetta against Dr. Robert Lesslie, that Dr. Lesslie had been giving the former football player pain pills and had cut him off. Or that the doctor had annoyed Phillip in some way. The doctor had treated Alonzo for back problems in the late 1990s, and that the two families only lived a mile apart. Could this have been some grudge from years ago? But if Phillip and Robert knew each other, nobody, including the authorities, could confirm it. And Jamie Dagenhart, Leslie's business manager at the urgent care clinic, said Phillip was never a patient. However, that came back again and again. Perhaps Phillip Adams had been suffering from CTE, a degenerative brain disease often linked to concussions that often shows up in the brains of football players after they've died. As far as wounds go, CTE is relentless. It never heals and it only worsens. And as it does, it can lead to anxiety and depression, violent mood swings, aggression, suicidal ideation, memory loss, poor impulse control, and sometimes delusional and psychotic behavior. Officially, Phillip was diagnosed with only 2 severe concussions during his career, but those close to him say he suffered many more than that. His father was well aware of the concussions suffered by his son during his career, and then came the autopsy results. Adams was suffering severe brain disease.
During our investigation, it was learned that Phillip Adams played professional football in the National Football League from 2010 to 2016 and suffered injuries during his football career. In interviews with the Adams family, we learned he endured several concussions, which is known to lead to chronic traumatic encephalopathy, commonly referred to as CTE. According to the family, Adams complained of excruciating pain from his injuries, often had memory issues, and difficulty sleeping.
The coroner, who had examined his brain, said the former NFL player had unusually severe brain disease in both frontal lobes. 20 years of football, she said, gave a definite rise to a diagnosis of Stage 2 chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. The disease is characterized by an unusual buildup of a protein called tau. The severity of the disease is categorized in 4 stages based on the amount and location of the tau buildup in the brain. Stage 4 is the most severe. In football, CTE results not only from hard hits that lead to a concussion, but also from the constant rattling of the brain inside the skull that happens during tackles and other plays. This repeated hit syndrome is known as subconcussive hits and lead to the tau buildup in the brain. CTE develops when the proteins begin clumping around small blood vessels in the brain. From there, the protein spreads and destroys other parts of the brain. There is no cure. Unlike the majority of other young NFL players with CTE, Phillip's CTE pathology showed frontal lobe predominance. In other words, it was unusually severe in his frontal lobes. Adams' pathology was similar to that of former NFL player Aaron Hernandez, who died by suicide while in prison for murder. Just like with Hernandez, the disease can only be diagnosed after death. Little could have been done to intervene. It's hard to see how Adams' CTE could not have contributed to the monstrous choices he made that day. After all, he had already been exhibiting symptoms of CTE. The family was not surprised by the results, only by how bad the condition was. They continued to pray for the families of the victims whose lives were lost. Since the tragedy in Rock Hill, awareness surrounding CTE has continued to grow. Many professional football teams, as well as colleges, are taking active steps to combat the potentially catastrophic impact of this sport on the health of its players, not to mention the lives of many others. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like the video, comment down below your take on it, and subscribe to the channel. Also, hit that notification bell to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case. Until next time, stay safe